Isn't this a nice treat? Inside my actual bedroom. Over there, you can see a little bit of a Infinity War poster that I have back when I first purchased my ticket online for the movie. Man, that's actually a pretty cool looking poster though, not gonna lie. But enough about Marvel. We're here to talk about two very famous DC films. We have the 2008 film, The Dark Knight. It's not based off any one comic, but it gets its most inspiration from The Long Halloween, so that's why I'm using it for a visual. Against the 2009 adaptation of the famous graphic novel Watchmen. See, Watchmen by Alan Moore. I cannot center things apparently. Two very, I wouldn't say very different, but different enough where it's worth putting them up against each other. One's directed by Christopher Nolan, one of the most popular directors of all time. The other is directed by Zack Snyder, who got off on a very solid footing but has since then been part of a lot of mixed reception, depending on who you are. So, let's just get right into it. We've got 5 rounds of this face off, so let's get into it. Let's start with round 1, and let's actually start off with the villain. So, the villain of Watchmen is actually one of the former heroes of the group Crime Busters, which is Ozymandias. Ozymandias was a former hero who doesn't actually have any real powers, but of course has a very high intellect and strategic mind. And he came up with the idea that due to the world being on the brink of a nuclear war, that he thought the best way to prevent nuclear war would be to unite the entire planet against a common enemy. Of course, in the movie version, that common enemy ended up being Dr. Manhattan, and he framed Dr. Manhattan for the destructions of several major cities around the globe. Now, the villain of The Dark Knight, again, this inspired The Dark Knight, but the movie isn't actually based off this. But the Joker is in here, so I'm going to use this again for visual. Joker is the main villain of The Dark Knight, famously played by Heath Ledger, who unfortunately died before the movie was officially released. Now, both villains of their respective stories are very well suited, appropriate, and well done villains. Of course, Heath Ledger's performance goes to a whole other level that has become famous and iconic in so many ways. So while Ozymandias is certainly in several respects a complicated and interesting villain, Heath Ledger's performance is on a whole different playing field. So this round goes to The Dark Knight. Now let's move on to round 2, the main hero. The main hero of The Dark Knight is obviously Batman, played by Christian Bale. Now, if you've seen a few of my Batman related videos, you probably already know that while I do really enjoy the Christopher Nolan Dark Knight films, I do think the Dark Knight film itself is a little bit overrated at this point. And Christian Bale's performance, while solid, it does get kind of made fun of a little bit. Now, to pick one hero from Watchmen is really debatable, because it has a large ensemble cast of heroes and characters. Although if we are to pick one hero, I would argue that it's actually Rorschach. Now I know that seems like a wild pick, especially since Rorschach, the character itself, created by Alan Moore, was never really intended to be a hero or even a person that people should look up to. He is a very disturbed and unbalanced individual, but he does have a clear sense of right or wrong. Like, he knows where to draw the line, even if people don't agree where that line is drawn. Batman does have a clear sense of right or wrong. Of course, he is willing to do a few things that might seem a little bit controversial. In the Dark Knight film, he used some pretty privacy invasive He used technology that was basically an invasion of privacy in order to locate the Joker during the climax of the film. Now, of course, Rorschach is a very entertaining character, and yeah, I'd still say in a certain way he is a bit of a hero from one point of view. But Batman is again a very iconic character, and even if you don't think Christian Bale's performance is the most iconic portrayal, and believe me, I don't think Christian Bale is not my number one Batman portrayal, but the fact that it is Batman and the way he is portraying the film, he is a much more likable and understandable hero character. So again, this round goes to The Dark Knight. Now let's move on to round 3, supporting cast. In The Dark Knight, you have Gordon, Harvey Dent, Alfred, and Rachel. With Watchmen, you have the other characters. You have Dr. Manhattan, Silk Spectre, Night Owl, a little bit of the comedian. But the other 3 characters are definitely the most important, most important supporting characters. Now, these performances of the Dark Knight characters in The Dark Knight, Gordon, Two-Face / Harvey Dent, Rachel, Alfred, they're again solid performances and very well respected actors and actresses. But, again, I wouldn't really think they pick these specific performances as the true portrayal of their favorite characters. That's not to say they aren't good. They have each their own moment to shine in the Dark Knight film. With Watchmen, though, it is focused on a more ensemble cast, so we actually get to spend a lot of time with every character, going a little bit into their psyche, finding out their likes and dislikes, their past, their personalities. It is a very different kind of film, focused more on a group of characters instead of one character with others sprinkled throughout. And all the characters of the Watchmen story are very iconic characters. Like, you know from looking at them, like, yeah, those guys, I like them. That's not to say that Gordon, Two-Face, those aren't iconic characters, or that their performances in The Dark Knight aren't iconic and recognizable, but similar to how Heath Ledger's performances on a whole nother level, the focus and portrayal of the Watchmen characters in the movie are just a little bit more different and unique. So this round goes to Watchmen. Now let's move on to round 4, the story. The story of The Dark Knight, it's again inspired by The Long Halloween. It's about sort of like the end of the whole traditional crime scene of mobsters, gangsters, your regular criminals, and it's focused more on the rise of the new kind of criminal presented by the Joker. In this film, the Joker goes head to head with the most powerful people in Gotham, both political-wise and criminal-wise, as well as Batman himself. The story of Watchmen starts off with the murder of one of the former Crime Busters group, the Comedian. And from there on, Rorschach himself investigates who is killing masks, as he puts it, as well as focus on other stories going around that connect to the main plot in some sort of way, such as tensions that's starting to lead to possible nuclear war, the lives of other hero characters, dark revelations. It's a layered story in Watchmen, as well as a layered story in The Dark Knight itself. I'm not taking anything away from the film. But of course, there's a certain execution and portrayal of the story itself that will decide who is the better storyteller. Christopher Nolan is a great filmmaker and director. But in terms of him adapting Dark Knight / Batman stories, they do kind of get a little too full of it themselves a bit. Let me kind of explain. Christopher Nolan has a certain directing style that really tries to make everything seem very important. And a lot of it is important, but after a while, you do feel like they're trying to put too much importance on a lot of different things that really aren't that important at all. And so it kind of makes for a slower, not quite as exciting Batman story. With Zack Snyder's execution of the Watchmen story, it visually is very faithful to the comic itself, and it pretty much does exactly portray the story as you would expect it to be portrayed in a movie version. But that again comes at some very big differences between the comic and the movie. And those differences are still debated about today. But of course, the themes of each of these separate movies, you got Dark Knight, about privacy, vigilantism, corruption, and some philosophical themes as well. But seeing as how faithful the movie is, it does again talk about superheroes themselves, what kind of world would actually portray real superheroes in a way that would actually make sense from a realistic point of view. That's a little bit of a confusing sentence, but basically, Watchmen is trying to show heroes that in a way that's not always favorable. Like, people who choose to become vigilantes obviously have some deep and disturbing problems behind them. And of course, there's a sense of having to grow up, having to see the world for what it is. There is a lot to unpack in the Watchmen story. It can be interpreted in many different ways. Whereas The Dark Knight, it has some layers to it, but it's always sort of straightforward in a certain way. So being a little bit more interpretive, I'm going to give this round to Watchmen. Now let's move on to round 5. Legacy. The legacy of the Dark Knight movie is very well known at this point. It is considered a lot of people's favorite Batman movie and one of the best superhero story movies ever. Weird way of saying that, but I'm sticking with it. Of course, you've known me in several of my videos that I think it's a little bit overrated at this point, especially since in the wake of a lot of other different movies too, like you have Joker, ironically enough. I mean, whether your personal opinions on Joker aside, it is a very experimental and realistic take on a comic book character that, in a way, seems to be a little more faithful to the soul and essence of its characters than, say, The Dark Knight in a way. Now, and of course, there are other superhero stories that have gone the more mature route as well, such as Logan. And again, personal take aside, it is a very more grown up way of presenting a superhero and the kind of personal journey he goes through. Watchmen's legacy is a little bit more mixed. There are people who hate the changes made to the movie, there are people who love it because of the changes, and there is a lot of in between stuff as well. But to compare these two movies together, there is a kind of a big difference between them. Christopher Nolan is trying to tell a crime epic that has to use comic book characters. And while they're not done badly, while it's not done badly, sticking with it, there's just doesn't seem to be a whole lot of faithful adaptation in terms of the Batman character himself and what he's most known for. With Watchmen, it is telling a very mature superhero story that deals with a lot of real world issues and ideologies in a much more balanced way, too. I mean, I know Zack Snyder over the years has gotten a lot of controversial moments in his life in regards to the certain movies he's put out. But there is no denying that Watchmen movie has kind of left an impact, not only for individual people, but for the genre itself. It's a, it was presenting a mature, grown up, dark superhero story a year after The Dark Knight, but also in a very different way. And if you were to compare the 2019 Joker film to these two movies, it kind of has more in common with Watchmen film. Sorry, a little burp there. It's a little hard to explain, but I think at the end of the day, there is a lot to appreciate and admire about both these films, but with Watchmen, I think there is a little bit more to it that has a little bit of a longer lasting impact. I know that may not seem kind of clear. I'm definitely probably not wording this correctly, but I'm going to give the round and the match to Watchmen movie. So that's all I have to say. And no, I have not seen the Watchmen show yet, although I am worried about it. But anyway, that's all I have to say right now. Like, comment, subscribe, share, and I'll see you guys next time.